everything is not enough. Really hard by the ocean. Among all those white hot sands, where every sunrise is just for you. So come along and take my hand.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Tank Club. Today I'm going to be showing you my companion tank build for the companion Bastian, and this is a build that we've managed to put together that works absolutely fantastic for this companion. Now this is a working tank build for the companion and it works very well. We've tested it in a range of content including delves, overland content, dolmens, world bosses, normal dungeons, normal trials, vet dungeons as well. This doesn't work very well in content in DLC content, so vet DLC dungeons, vet trials does not function very well in those, but we found a way to make the companion tank work with very little support required. You don't have to constantly be spamming heals, you don't have to be babysitting the companion. It can do the job that we need it to do. It can tank enemies and it can stay alive. So first of all, we're going to have a quick look at the gear. Now for the gear, as it's a tank, I've obviously gone with heavy armor, and that's quite important. Heavy armor is very vital for keeping your tank alive. There's no point using medium or light. They are damage based. Heavy armor is tank based. It always is for normal tanks, and it's going to be for the companion tanks as well. So we are going to be using the vigorous gear, and this is going to increase max health by 2.6%. So every single slot is going to be vigorous. By using the heavy armor, we increase our armor by 2,900, and every single piece is max health. Now with the gear, I also looked at the reduced damage gear, I looked at the reduced cooldown gear, I looked at all of those different things, I've tested them all out, and none of them perform very well. So the problem you've got with the reduced damage gear is it just didn't seem to do a great deal. And the fact that we can't see any advanced stats, we can't see any of the behind the scenes information about what our base mitigation and things are for the companion, we don't know what effect that's having on the companion's ability. With the increased max health from the vigorous trait, we're able to see straight away what difference it's making. So if we have a quick look here, if we look at Bastian just there, he's got 40.5k health. So it's kind of the same kind of health you'd expect from a regular tank. Without the vigorous gear, it has 30.9k. I think the base value for companions is 30k, but Bastian has a passive that increases his max health a little bit, and so with the vigorous gear we're at 40.5k. Now this seems to help drastically, and the other things they're not working. The other gear underperformed compared to increased max health, so this is the gear that you should ideally use for a tank companion. Okay, so in terms of the skills, we've gone with a very select choice of skills. There's quite a few skills, when you read them they sound very good, but actually they're not very good, and the reason why they're not very good is because of the cooldowns. The priority for a tank companion is having skills that have a high uptime, a low cooldown, and provide high survivability. So you need to really look at the skills and look for those low cooldowns, those high uptimes, especially from the tank's perspective, because if they're not able to use skills often, they're not able to heal often, they're not able to use survival skills, your companion is going to be constantly dead. So it's very important to use skills that fit those criteria. So to maximize the companion's ability to tank in certain situations, you might want to switch some skills around. So if you're going into, I don't know, a delve and you want it to control ads, then you're going to have to set this up a bit differently. But generally this is the best way to set up a tank companion. Now Bastian is much better at dealing with damage situations compared to the other companion Miri, and Bastian can keep himself alive in most situations that I've tested him in. So first skill we've got on the bar here is Provoke. Now this is Bastian's taunt. The cooldown is 12 seconds. So he thrusts the weapon with disciplined precision at an enemy, dealing physical damage, taunting the enemy for 15 seconds. At the point of making this video, taunt was a little bit bugged, and sometimes when Bastian uses a taunt, it doesn't work. I have reported this on the PTS, and hopefully this will be fixed, ready for release, but currently, when Bastian uses his taunt, it doesn't always work. So he will most of the time gain aggro, but sometimes the boss will lose aggro, and then he will struggle to get it back, even when using this skill. This is something to keep in mind when using your companion as a tank. Next, we've got Kindle. Bastion launches a searing fireball at themselves or an ally, healing for 7,350 health. This is used when Bastion or the ally is below 75% health. So this will get used early on in a fight. So when he takes like 1 or 2 hits of damage, this skill will get used. It's got an 8-second cooldown. Now this is very, very important. 8 seconds. So every 8 seconds, he can use this skill. Next we've got this barrier. It's basically Ignis Shield. So Bastion calls the earth to their defense, granting a damage shield, 3,675 damage shield every 6 seconds. While the damage shield holds, healing receivers increased by 15%. So his first skill is going to be boosted by 15%. Any other heals that we're using are going to be boosted by 15%. So this is a nice skill. It's a damage shield and it's a healing buff. This has got a 12-second cooldown and it's got a 6-second duration. So if the shield doesn't get used within 6 seconds, it expires, but you should be able to use up a 3,600 shield within 6 seconds. Next we've got On Guard. Now again, a 6-second duration, an 8-second cooldown. So this grants a damage shield that absorbs 25% of their max health for 6 seconds. Now, as you know, we've used the Vigorous Gear, which buffs our max health. So because we've used the Vigorous Gear, we've got more max health, the shield is bigger. So now we've got a shield every 8 seconds, we've got a 3,600 shield every 12 seconds, and we've got a 7.5k heal every 8 seconds. So a lot of survivability. This is how we're able to use this particular build to tank bosses, and he doesn't need any assistance with healing. Next we've got our final normal skill, which is Drake's Blood. This is again another heal. It's got an 8-second duration, a 12-second cooldown. Bastion draws their Draconic Blood, healing for 25% of their max health. So again, a 10k heal, because we've increased our max health. It would be a much smaller heal if we weren't using the Vigorous Gear. Reduces their damage taken by 20% as well for 8 seconds. So we've got reduced damage for 8 seconds. We've got a heal that we can use every 12 seconds. That's going to be a 10k heal. When you combine the 4 survivability skills that we've just listed, obviously this is going to be very, very strong. Bastion only uses this when below 75% health. So we've got a lot of survivability skills. Now this is absolutely essential to keep Bastion alive. If you want him to be tanking enemies, if you want him to stay alive, and you don't want to have to heal him yourself, this is how you've got to set it up. All of these skills have got 12 seconds or less on the cooldown, and that is absolutely the most vital point about setting up this build. If you use other skills that look good, that have got a much higher cooldown, they are almost never used, so then your companion can never use them when they need them. For the ultimate, there is only one possible ultimate to use on this particular companion, and that's Unleashed Rage. Requires 188 ultimate. The best part about this is that it stuns enemies for 4 seconds. So it's quite nice, especially if it's used on an ad pull. He uses his ultimate. You can forcefully choose to use the ultimate when you want. So you could time this ultimate for an ad pack so that you don't have to slot a crowd control skill. So you could send him into a pack of ads, use the ultimate, stuns them. Because it won't stun an elite target or a boss. It'll just do the damage. So it's damage and it's a stun, so it's quite nice. So if you look at some of the other skills that you might look at and think they look pretty good, if we go to the one-hand and shield skills, we've also got Bash and Bulwark, he charges the enemy. So this would be a decent skill to use. If you're only doing things where you're killing ads, this would be quite good. So you'd put this number 1 on your skill bar because you'd want him to use this to charge into the fight. And that would potentially be a good way to set it up as well. You could then use some crowd control skills alongside that. So you've got Crushing Claws, which is basically talons, and that immobilizes the enemies. So if you're not going to time your ultimate for situations in an ad pull to stun them, you could use Crushing Claws as a talons. So you could set him to charge into a group, talons, and then chaining enemies. Now, a thing to look at here is the claws are on a 16-second cooldown. So when he goes into an ad pull, it's likely he's only going to get a chance to use this once. So it's not really that useful. It's not really great because it only lasts 4 seconds and then you've got a really, really long cooldown. So it's taking up a slot on your bar and it takes too long. So if you're doing boss fights, do not slot this. It's such a waste of a skill. It doesn't provide anything for your companion. Your companion has to run quite selfish to be able to survive. Again, the chains is once every 8 seconds. You will only chain an enemy that's more than 10 meters away, which is pretty good. But if you are going to use an ad pull setup, you would want him to charge into the ad pull, to talons, and then to chain. That is the best way to set it up. for that situation. So there are some other interesting looking skills in there. We have got this passive ability for wearing heavy armor, so increased healing received by 1% for each heavy armor piece. So we've got quite a few healing skills. He's going to get even more healing based on that, so 7% more healing. And it increases the amount of damage can be blocked by 7% as well, because again, we are wearing 7 pieces of heavy armor. Now, this is the heavy armor skill, Bulwark. If you look at this, not a good skill. It sounds good. Bastian becomes an unstoppable defender, blocking and reflecting all attacks for 5 seconds. That sounds good. Used when he is below 75% health and fighting a difficult monster. The big problem you got is it's a 36-second cooldown. And if you are using this skill and you remove one of the more survivable skills that we've already slotted, the problem you've got is that you're going to have to wait a very long time before this is active again. So whereas currently on our skill bar, we've got 4 skills that heal or shield or benefit his survivability, and they are active between every 8 and 12 seconds. This is every 36 seconds, so it's going to get very infrequent use, and it's just not worth the skill slot because of the long cooldown. It's just not good. Some of the skills we've got in here as well, so we've got Ritual of Salvation. This looks like a kind of a good tank skill as well. 8-second duration, 16-second cooldown, so 8 seconds where it's not active. 50% uptime. When we look at this, Bastian brands the earth underneath them with a rune, protecting for 8 seconds, reduce their damage taken by 20%. When you compare this to skills that we've already slotted, so when we look at things like On Guard, Drake's Blood's got a much higher uptime, so it's got an 8-second duration and a 12-second cooldown. So you can get the 20% reduced damage from Drake's Blood much quicker. So basically, you've got a 4-second downtime, 8-second uptime. So that's much better than Ritual of Salvation, which is kind of doing a similar thing, but it's got a much worse uptime. Another skill you kind of could use, but it's got a really long cooldown again, is Parallel. 16-second cooldown, but this generates more ultimate. So potential skill that you could use, but again, it's not worth removing some of the useful skills we've got already to slot this, in my opinion. Then we've got Undaunted. Crimson Font. This kind of seems like it might be good, but then when you look again at the duration, 16-second duration, 36-second cooldown. And it's a very tiny heal, so it heals every second for 16 seconds for 432, so it's a tiny amount. Even though it does provide a synergy, so a Crimson Funnel synergy is available for you, and it's just not really vital in my opinion because of the really bad cooldown. And the problem is as well, Bastian will cast this immediately at the start of a fight. As soon as you instigate combat, Bastian will cast this, and then if you don't need it at the start of the fight and you've got to wait till the end, it's already going to be gone. So he casts it at a point where you potentially don't even need it. Skeletal Aegis, so this is a 6-second duration, a 36-second cooldown. You might be kind of seeing the trend here, but these skills sound good, but they're not good. So surrounds himself with a whirlwind of bones, granting a damage shield for 30% of their max health. While the damage shield holds, the ally can activate a bone Aegis synergy, granting them a damage shield. So it sounds good again because it gives you a synergy, gives you a shield. Sounds good, but it's got such a long cooldown, it's just not worth using. Because Bastian is not going to be able to survive any kind of boss encounter while using this skill because of the lack of skills he'll have available. And then finally we've got the Imperial passive, so tough, increased max health by 3% and damage done by 3%. So we've got some decent stats because of those as well. So in terms of doing overland content, obviously Bastian can deal with that quite easily for overland enemies. They don't particularly pose much of a threat or a challenge, so Bastian is very good at dealing with those. And quest situations as well. Generally enemies within quests and overland are designed to be able to kill really easily. For world bosses do have a bit more threat, and there is some really difficult world bosses. But with this particular setup, with the low cooldown of skills, Bastian can easily survive these encounters and be able to tank world bosses. Now this is particularly good if you're a damage dealer. Obviously somebody's got to do damage. The companions don't really provide that much damage. I think I've seen 6k to sort of 8k DPS generally for the companions, sometimes even low as 4k depending on your skills and gear. But generally you want to be the person doing damage, and if you're going to use a companion, a tank or a healer companion seems to be one of the better options. And for world bosses, some of them can hit really hard, so Bastian will survive most encounters with world bosses. I haven't managed to go into a world boss unsuccessfully where Bastian died in this setup, so he does work very well. and it will make it a lot easier for you to be able to kill world bosses on your own. So at times where there are no other players around, at times when it's a very difficult world boss, Bastian is going to be able to survive most of the time. In terms of delves and things like that, obviously it works really easily again because delves aren't generally aimed at high damage and things like that. It's quite simple. There's only one boss, so the ad pulls, if you can, set it up a little bit differently so we can deal with the ads. When you get to the boss, you want him in the boss setup. Bosses generally don't have high health in delves, so we can deal with that situation quite easily. Now when we start getting onto slightly harder content, normal dungeons, Bastian has no trouble at all with normal dungeons. Those are pretty low damage again. The fact that Bastian's running a selfish tank setup here means that he is able to survive normal dungeons and normal DLC dungeons as well. They don't really pose much of a threat because the damage environments are quite low. Normal dungeons are aimed at the mass majority of players in the game. They're aimed to be able to be completed by everybody. So Bastian can absolutely tank in normal dungeons very, very easily with this setup. When you move on to kind of DLC dungeons, he has a little bit more trouble in normal DLC dungeons. He can kind of tank normal DLC dungeons. It's not great to do so because you have such a range of enemies and mechanics in DLC dungeons, or even on normal, that he does struggle a little bit to deal with the mechanics and deal with the different ads and multiple ads and stuff, because his taunt is only a 12-second taunt, you've got to remember, so he can only taunt one enemy at a time. So it is quite difficult if he has got to taunt multiple enemies. So generally try and avoid DLC dungeons if you can, especially on Vet. He doesn't perform great in those particular situations. In terms of normal Vet dungeons, me and Bastian did manage to kind of duo a Vet dungeon on like a regular base game Vet dungeon, non-DLC, and he did a reasonable good job. Obviously ads were escaping and attacking me, but as long as you're kind of able to shield through it, it's not really too much of an issue. When it comes to bosses though, he was able to tank the bosses very easily without any healing support from me. So it definitely worked in that situation. He can do base game Vet dungeons. The DLC dungeons, definitely not. We couldn't even get through like the first ad pull. We tried Falkreath on Vet. He couldn't make it past the Minotaurs. He just got killed by the Minotaurs very easily. So he won't be able to do those, but he can do Vet dungeons. But you will have to keep an eye on him, and it will be a bit messy because you've got to remember he can't play mechanics and he can't taunt all ads. He's only got a 12-second taunt, so it's not that great for dealing with multiple enemies. Normal trials. He can tank normal trials. Obviously the big issue is the lack of being able to play mechanics, so his positioning can be off. If you try to take him into Sunspire, for example, he's probably going to stand too close to the dragon. If you take him into more of Lorcaj, he's not going to be able to tank the boss in the right location. So there are situations it's going to be difficult, but he can tank normal trial bosses. The damage is low enough in normal trials that he can tank the bosses. We've got a clip here where he tanks St. Olms on normal, and he's able to deal with that situation pretty well. He doesn't die, and with healing support from me, he definitely won't die. But generally, you don't want him to be the one in charge of tanking in that kind of situation generally, because it's just the problem with positioning. You can't play mechanics, so it could be a bit difficult to get him to go and be where you need him to be as a tank, and you'd be much better off with a real person who you can guide and position, and they can be in the right location for where they need to be. So overall, Bastian, definitely a very good option for a tank companion. It's going to be great for players who want to get through content. They're a damage dealer. They need somebody to hold enemies for them. Bastian can do the job. You don't need to babysit him. You don't need to hold his hand. You don't need to heal him. If you want to heal him, you want to have a little heal on him, that will help him, but you don't need to. He can keep himself alive with the setup we've discussed here today. In terms of Bastian versus Miri for the tank, kind of from a tank perspective, Bastian is far superior to Miri because he's able to do everything you need to do. He's got burst heals, he's got heals over time, he's got shields. With Miri's kind of a Nightblade companion. She is not as good at staying alive, and one of her main healing skills makes her go invisible, which makes her lose aggro of enemies. So that is a really, really poor design of that skill, which makes her much less valuable than Bastian for tanking. So I hope this video has helped everybody out in terms of setting up a tank companion for the Blackwood patch. If you've got any questions, please leave me a message in the comments below or on the Tank Club Discord. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.